Hey guys, today we're going to be picking up where we left off with the Fugitive Slave Act and talking about the growth of abolitionism in the North. Here are your goals. There aren't very many. This probably won't be a super long video. You're welcome. Alright, so let's talk about some background info to begin with. So first of all, abolitionism, a quick reminder. Abolitionism was a movement that aimed to abolish, aka to outlaw, slavery in the United States. And from the period between 1830 and 1850, it remained a pretty small and pretty unpopular movement among the average Northerners. Basically, it was just a small group of people who really cared about slavery, whereas most Northerners were worried about other stuff like finding jobs and taking care of normal everyday stuff. But so these abolitionists in this early period made moral arguments for the elimination of slavery. Basically, they believed that slavery was wrong, and they tried to prove that slavery was wrong in order to get rid of it. There are two really important abolitionists from this time period that you should know about. One is Frederick Douglass, that you see there on the left, and the other is William Lloyd Garrison on the right. And these two guys together became leaders of the Abolitionist Party, and they remain leaders of the Abolitionist Party up until after the Civil War is over. So they see the abolitionist movement grow from a small beginning to this national force that eventually gets rid of slavery. So they are successful. But in the beginning, between 1830 and 1850, neither of the big parties, the Whigs or the Democrats, supported abolition. Basically, both of the main parties just try to ignore the slavery question as much as possible because they want to win votes both in the North and the South. And if you take a stance on slavery either way, you're going to lose votes. Alright, but after 1850, abolitionism becomes widely popular in the North and starts to lead to a conflict between the North and the South. And this video is going to help to explain why that change occurs. I would argue is that there are three main reasons why abolitionism becomes more popular in the North. One is there's a growing conflict over the Western territories. Two is that the Fugitive Slave Act really annoys a lot of Northerners and helps Northerners to realize how brutal and terrible slavery really is. And three, and maybe the most important, is the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a novel that basically is designed to show how terrible slavery really is. Alright, let's start by talking about the conflict over Western territory. So, first of all, we need to understand that Northerners, by the 1840s and 50s, had basically developed a really strong sense of pride and self-esteem in their Northern way of doing things. Basically, they thought that the Northern way that involved industry, internal improvements, and paid labor was the best way in the world to get stuff done. And they thought this because the Northern economy at that time was booming, lots of people had work, things were advancing really rapidly. And on top of this, they saw that the South was becoming more and more backwards. And the Northerners started to think that slavery was the reason for this. Basically, if the South had just adopted Northern systems of industry and paid labor, the South would be just as good as the North and wouldn't be backwards and poor. So the Northerners think they're better than the South. After the Mexican-American War, Northerners wanted to keep the new territory that they had earned in this war, or rather stolen from Mexico in this war, and they wanted to open it up to the Northern way of doing things, basically to keep the land open to free workers and to keep slavery out. And what this led to was the creation of a small political party called the Free Soil Party. And the Free Soil Party never really caught on, but its ideas would eventually be taken up by the Republican Party, so it's important to look at. And so the Free Soil Party, their main goal was to prevent the spread of slavery, and they wanted to keep Western lands open to the Northern system of paid labor and industry. The second thing that really started to bother Northerners was the Fugitive Slave Act, which came around as a result of the Compromise of 1850 and said that Southern slave owners were allowed to send people up north to kidnap free blacks from the northern states and basically bring them south and return them to slavery if they suspected them of being runaway slaves. And these people that were taken by Southern kidnappers didn't even get a trial, so there was no real way to know if the free black people who were being abducted actually were slaves or if they were just being kidnapped. And so Northerners viewed this as a terrible law that was basically stomping all over Northern rights and was forcing the North to go along with the Southern system of slavery. And on top of this, it made Northerners see how terrible slavery really was, because these people that they knew, people who lived in their community, people who worked in the community, were all of a sudden kidnapped and taken away, and sometimes their families were even left behind. People who had lived in the North for decades were taken back and returned to slavery. And Northerners, for the first time, many of them, began to really feel upset about the idea of slavery, because now they knew people who were being taken and put into slavery. They also started to feel anger towards the government, because Northerners saw the Fugitive Slave Act as something that was totally wrong, but the federal government and the Whig Party actually helped the Southern states carry out the Fugitive Slave Act. They would even send police officers and soldiers to help collect free black people from the North. And the North felt like the federal government was working with the South. And so this helped to lead to the fall of the Whig Party and to the rise of a new anti-slavery party called the Republicans. Finally, and most importantly, maybe, is the publication of a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. So this book was written by a woman from Connecticut named Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it was published as a book in 1854. And it was intentionally written to show that slaves were people and that they suffered terrible, terrible cruelty because of slavery. And Harriet Beecher Stowe is quoted as saying that she's saying this to her sister at the time, that if I could only use a pen as you can, I would write something that will make this whole nation feel what an accursed thing slavery is. So her main intention was to show that slavery was bad. She writes this book, and it becomes a literary phenomenon in the North. It's the best-selling book in America, in American history up to that point, except for the Bible. So this book is being read by basically everybody in the North. And everybody is seeing in this book, some of them for the first time, exactly how terrible slavery in the South really is. Slaves are beaten, slaves are killed, slaves die trying to run away in this book. And they see how terrible slavery is. The Northerners do. And because of this book, millions of Northerners begin to think that slavery is wrong, and abolitionist ideas become very popular in the North. And so a lot of people think that it's because of this book that a lot of Northerners started to oppose slavery in the South and to fight against the spread of slavery elsewhere. Alright, so that's the end of this video. You should be able now to list at least 3 big causes for why slavery becomes really unpopular in the North in the 1850s.